This podcast is part of the C-Suite Radio Network, turning the volume up on business.
Welcome to the Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer. Join us as Deb talks with her guests, experts in their fields, as they share real-life stories and techniques to power up your business.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today we're going to have so much fun talking about that dreaded word, selling. You know, it's funny. People say, I don't want to be a salesman. Oh, no, I don't know, no. And in truth, if we have a business, we are in sales. And so get over it, folks. But my guest today is going to be talking to us about how selling is such a positive thing, how to make it positive, how to truly benefit both the seller and the sellee, and to do it in a great way that has integrity, that has all sorts of good stuff. And so please join me in welcoming Ian Altman to our program today. Welcome, Ian.
Deb, thanks for having me here.
Great. Well, let me tell people just a little bit about you, and then we will just jump into this. So as a CEO for 2 decades, Ian Altman started, sold, and grew his business, services, and technology companies from zero to over $1 billion, with a B, dollars in value. Ian has since spent years researching how customers make decisions. His modern approach to sales and marketing is known for helping organizations around the world achieve explosive growth. A leading authority on accelerating business growth, Ian is currently recognized as one of the 30 global gurus on sales. He's a co-author of the best-selling book, Same Side Selling, and hosts the weekly Same Side Selling podcast available on iTunes. Ian lives in the Washington, D.C. area with his 2 adult-ish children, a dog, and a wonderful wife he doesn't deserve. To inspire us with a modern approach to growing businesses on the same side with our clients, please join me in welcoming Ian Altman to our program. So again, Ian, welcome.
Deb, you know what? I have a feeling we're going to have some fun.
I know. You know what? And I was having so much fun reading your book. And for those who are watching the video, here it is. For those who are just listening, it is called Same Side Selling: How Integrity and Collaboration Drive Extraordinary Results for Sellers and Buyers. So let's go back a little bit and tell us, because, as I mentioned at the start, people go, ooh, sales. How did you decide this was something that truly is your passion to help people get through that icky feeling and really embrace being a salesperson?
Well, I think there's a couple things that come into play. One is that when it comes to sales, no one was born with this notion of what they should be doing. Right. So in most cases, people are doing what other people have taught them to do. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, the sales industry as a whole doesn't have a great reputation for people operating with high integrity. So people who operate with integrity kind of find the sales notion being a little bit off-putting. Mm-hmm. And throughout my career building companies, I never felt like we were selling anything. We were just helping our clients get better results for whatever it is they were trying to achieve.
Right.
And so teaching people that same model works pretty well. When I wrote Same Side Selling, I co-wrote it with a guy named Jack Quarles. Mm-hmm. And Jack is a guy who spent 2 decades in purchasing and procurement.
So the other side.
Yeah, well, or we would like to say the same side, but sure.
Right. And we'll talk about same side.
And the idea is that this is the only book we're aware of that has the perspective of the buyer and the seller baked into every page.
Right. And I love this concept, as you mentioned, that we're on the same side. And, the premise of the book is that normally you've got buyer and seller, and then you've got, the table in between or whatever it is, because it's a very adversarial type of thing. And I think that's why so many people get the icky feeling. We feel like we're forcing people to buy our product and all of these various things. Or, there are those people who are very competitive and see it as a contest. I can convince you to buy this product. I can make you buy this product. I can win Salesman of the Year, all of those various things. And so the concept is that we need to be on the same side, and it's win-win. So tell us really how you decided, that you were going to work with Jack and create this book.
Well, it's interesting. So Jack and I met through this networking group in the Washington, D.C. area. That's really the antithesis of networking because the premise is that nobody's trying to pitch anything to each other. Everyone's just trying to learn together.
Uh-huh.
And I was giving a class on sales strategies, and Jack signed up for it. I thought, wow, that's really great that one of the fellow members of this group is signing up. And after the fact, Jack said, well, yeah, I was trying to figure out what dastardly tricks you were teaching people.
Right. Uh-huh.
And it turns out that everything you were teaching was the same kind of stuff that I was teaching buyers. And so it was much more collaborative. And we kind of put our heads together. And the funny part is that all of the metaphors historically used in books about sales either use a game metaphor where there's a winner and a loser, or they use a battle metaphor, in which case the loser dies. And then we wonder why there's this adversarial tension. And instead, what we want to think about is who are the clients for whom we can have the greatest impact and results? For whom can we move the needle the most? And that's where we should focus our time. And when we do that, we end up in an environment where our clients are enthusiastic about meeting with us. Let's face it, if you walk into a store and a hyper-ambitious salesperson walks up to you and says, hey, may I help you? What's the most common response?
I'm fine. Just looking.
Yeah, no, thanks. Just looking. And the reason we do that is because there have been millions of people in sales who came before us who trigger that response that says, the person I'm dealing with is more interested in their own interests than mine.
Right.
And if we pivot that so that we demonstrate that we actually care about what kind of results they get and what they're trying to achieve, then we build that level of trust where those people come back to us time and time again, always entrusting us with their challenges.
Right. And you mentioned the fact that, we follow what other people have done. And maybe we've bought the books, How to Be the Better Salesperson. We've taken the classes, all of those things. And typically they have that acronym, ABC, or ABS, always be selling.
Always be closing. Always be closing.
See, I knew I had it right in there. So always be closing, as in always be making the sale. And don't take no for an answer, all those various things. And I love that you have a different acronym. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so the acronym is FIT, or Finding Impact Together.
Okay.
And the idea is that you might have a potential client who has a superficial interest in what you do and what services you offer, but you don't yet know whether or not there's enough impact to them to warrant an investment or a change. So the idea is that if we ask the right questions early on in the process, what we should be looking at is almost skeptically, okay, so you have an interest in this, but is it enough of an interest to warrant a change? Is enough of an interest to warrant an investment in this? So, for example, we were talking about some roof work you just had done at your house. Well, if your roof was totally fine, then a roofing contractor can come to your house all day long and you say, well, our roof is fine.
Right. Yeah. But we don't need a new roof.
Yeah, but once you realize that either problems are imminent or you're having leaks or you're having, issues with energy consumption or things like that, then all of a sudden they've got your attention. So finding impact together is about mutually determining with your client or prospect, is this something that's worth solving? And if it's not worth it for them to solve it, then you don't want to spend a lot of time trying to sell to somebody who doesn't have a need for what you do.
And I love that is the premise through much of your book, is the fact that, it might not be the right product or service for that person or that client. And if it's not, it's okay to walk away. And, that's such a hard concept, especially when you're, say, a new business owner, because you're thinking, I have got to make every sale. I've got to do everything I possibly can to keep money coming through the door. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
So Deb, one of the challenges is that early on in a business, we think all revenue is good revenue. And
we have to pay those bills.
Yeah, you got to pay those bills. And I'm trying to figure out how I can bring in enough money to keep the business afloat and to help us thrive. And one of the things you realize after you've been in business long enough is that the clients who aren't a good fit end up being the bane of your existence.
Right.
And they become what we call toxic clients. And these are people who before you know it, you've been sucked into the vortex of evil.
Right.
And it's just, they're upset because they've spent money and they're not getting the results that they're looking for. And you're upset because you feel like you're killing yourself to service them, but they're just not happy.
Right.
And so what we have to think about instead is, what are the problems that we're really good at solving? And how do we seek people out who have or are facing those challenges? If you think about it, it's like a medical metaphor. If I said to you, oh, well, hey, Deb, why don't you come in next Tuesday and I'm going to do carpal tunnel surgery on you, but you don't feel you have carpal tunnel.
You've never even checked to see if I have carpal tunnel.
And then it's like, oh yeah, but I've got great references.
Right.
And
I'm really good at this.
And I can schedule around around what's most convenient for you. And oh, here are all my credentials. But guess what? If you don't think you have carpal tunnel, then there's no reason for you to schedule that. And so then what happens is someone in sales says, well, what if I discount it? Okay.
Oh.
Now, I still don't have carpal tunnel. And now you sound desperate.
Yeah.
But,
so then I'm thinking, well, maybe I could have carpal tunnel and get it at a really big discount.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that you would never subject yourself to surgery for something that you don't think you have the condition. And that's what happens in sales is too often people are saying, oh, I have exactly what you need. What do you need again? And then that triggers that adversarial response.
Right. And, I've definitely done that where, you have a client, whether they're a current client or a potential client, and they say, we need X. You can't do X, but you're like, oh, I don't want to lose this client. So I'm going to figure out how to do X. Or, and so then what happens, every once in a while, lightning strikes. And you figure out how to do X and it turns into a great thing. But that's like, this small part. Most of the time you do X, you do it adequately.
Or poorly.
Possibly, right. Yeah. If you're lucky, you do it adequately. And, but again, we didn't want to lose that client. We didn't want to tell them no, all those various things. And so then you're right. We're unhappy because we're doing work that we don't want to do. And they're unhappy because they're getting work that isn't good.
Yeah. And so what happens is our reputation suffers. And now you're not going to get repeat business from them. They're certainly not going to refer you to somebody. And if someone said, well, how is this person doing X? You'd say, they worked for us. It was adequate. Right? No one's ever referred somebody to someone they felt was adequate. Right. Oh, let me tell you, this person was totally acceptably mediocre. Right. Like, you don't get referrals that way.
There's that commercial on right now that, how is your doctor? Oh, he's okay.
Yeah, exactly. He's all right.
And while we might not always be exceptional, we want to be far better than adequate.
Sure. Exactly. And the idea is that we get graded almost on a curve. So if there are 3 things you do for your client and 2 of them are right in your wheelhouse and you have amazing expertise, and the 3rd one you don't do so well, you get penalized for taking on the 3rd one because the client says, well, overall, they were kind of a B.
Right.
And if you just did the 2 you do really well, you'd be an A. And guess what? They'll refer you to other people if you did A-level work, but not necessarily B-level work.
And the funny thing is, it might be evenly distributed, a third, a third, a third, but somehow that bad is going to take over more,
Exactly.
and again, you might be doing adequate, but that's not what we want to be remembered for.
Yeah. It's funny. There's a fellow speaker, Marcus Sheridan. He and I are good friends, and we've spoken at events together. It's got to be 30 times where he and I have either worked with the same client or spoken at the same event. And so we each probably know each other's content as well or better than anyone else on the planet. And so people will say, well, this stuff. You can do the content marketing piece that Marcus does. Or they'll say to Marcus, well, you can help us on the sales side like Ian can. And we say, no, not really. Like, yeah, I know what the bits are. I know the parts of his keynote. But when you get into the detailed Q&A, not so much.
Right. Well, let's put it back in medical terms. A doctor is trained on many, many things, but then they specialize. I don't want my heart surgeon doing something that is not heart surgery, or even worse, I don't want my general practitioner doing heart surgery.
Yeah, I've seen it before on TV. So
Right.
come on in,
It
Deb.
happens on Grey's Anatomy all the time.
Well, and the funny part is that if we take that even further, when people are selling to their customer and the customer says, well, and here's the way we're going to evaluate you, it would be analogous to a patient coming into a doctor saying, here's the way I want you to perform the surgery.
Right.
But we don't think of it that way.
No.
So we as the sellers are actually the experts on the best way for our clients to purchase and get the maximum results from whatever it is we offer. But shame on us if we don't develop enough trust that they use us as a guide to figure that out.
Right. You know, and that's one of the other things you talk about in your book is really we've got to put ourselves in their shoes. You know, and what is it? You know, it might be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but if the person buying it doesn't think that, you know, or needs something different, you know, that's the tricky thing. And you know, and you know, we need to think about ourselves as being that person being pitched to. You know, what is it that we want to hear when they're talking about it?
Yep. Well, it's interesting because I've done this research with over 10,000 CEOs and executives around the world on how they make and approve decisions. And so I run people through this exercise I call the Gesundheit exercise. And the premise of this exercise,
I was about to say Gesundheit, but
yeah, Gesundheit. I picked it because I wanted something that was easy to spell, pronounce, and remember. And so the idea of this Gesundheit exercise is I tell people, look, you're a senior executive. Someone in your team comes to you and says, we got to buy this Gesundheit. It costs $20,000, takes 45 days to implement, requires no resources on our part. What are the 5 questions you have to have answered to be comfortable making an informed decision?
Right.
And then in these groups, after they come up with the top 5, I give them 90 seconds to reduce it from 5 to 3. And the interesting part is that across over 10,000 people around the world, they come up with the same 3 questions over and over and over again.
So what are those?
It's funny you should ask.
Funny I should ask.
Funny you should ask. See, you are a seasoned professional, Deb.
I am.
So the questions they ask are, and they go in this sequence. The first question is, what problem does this solve, or why do I need it? So it's a compound question, and the reason why is that when people say, what problem does it solve, and I ask them, what do you mean? They say, why do I need it? And if someone says, why do I need this? And I ask, what do you mean? They say, well, what problem does it solve? So they always tend to go hand in hand. They're the flip side of the same coin. The next question they ask is the ROI question, or return on investment question, which is, what's the likely outcome or result? Now, this is not, what did the salesperson say our result would be? Because most people won't find that to be their likely result. But rather, what are other people saying who are just like us about what the results could be? And then the distant third in all this is, what are the alternatives?
Oh, okay.
And it might sound weird to say that that's the distant third, but imagine you've got an important issue in your business and you're talking to a vendor who you're just in complete sync with them about what problem they would solve for you and why you need their help. And this is also the vendor you feel has the highest likelihood of delivering the best results for your needs. Isn't that your vendor? So if you address those first 2 questions really well, the third one becomes implied. The challenge is this, is that if the way you are selling today is not aligned with those questions, what are you doing in the sales process? Are you making it longer? Or are you making it shorter?
Right.
And so if it's not aligned with that, you're actually making the process longer rather than shorter.
Right.
And so everything that I teach is centered around those questions. And the idea is, if we can help our clients address those questions early in the process, then we're going to be the most comfortable people for them to do business with, which means early on, the first thing we have to figure out is, what problem do we solve for our customers in their words?
Right. Now, Ian, one of the things I noticed when you had those 3 questions was not asked was, how much will it cost?
Yeah. Isn't that funny? So the reality is this, and we'll get to this in more detail, but the reality is that rarely is your customer making a decision solely about price. And if they are, it means that we just commoditized ourselves.
Right.
So the only time you buy something purely on price is if you believe that you're doing the exact same thing from somebody else at a higher price. if as a seller, if the way you sell right now is dependent upon you being the cheapest, then you better have the lowest cost production and the lowest cost delivery, because if you win a deal today because you're the cheapest, you will lose that client 6 months from now because somebody else was cheaper.
Right.
If you win business because your client feels they'll get the best results with you, irrespective of price, then it makes it very challenging for the competition to win that business away from you tomorrow or at any point in the future.
Right. And it is all about providing that value. And you talk about this in the book about how, it is going that extra mile without giving away the farm. I've interviewed Bob Berg several times, and his, one of his big tenets is the fact that we need to always be providing extra value. And I asked him one time, I said, but won't we go broke? And he said, no, don't give it all away. And certainly don't get taken advantage of. Because, everybody is going to ask, from the seller's side, or from the buyer's side, they're always going to want a little bit more. What more can you give me? And there are times where you can give them, a little bit more and add that extra value, but you don't want to be taken advantage of.
Well, and the biggest thing really is that we need to focus more on the results that we're delivering rather than the resources we're providing.
Right.
So the challenge that a lot of businesses make is that they sell either things by the hour or everything's by the unit. And it's the easiest way to be commoditized, because never has somebody thought to themselves, what I really need is I need 3.4 hours of a CPA, or I need 5 hours of an attorney, or I need, 7 hours of this consultant. No, they say, I have this problem and I want it to go away. And the only time they talk about hours is because someone selling to them says, well, it'll take about 12 hours.
Right.
But instead, if we focused on, well, so what happens if you don't solve this? And how important is this compared to other things on your plate? And then what would success look like 6 months down the road? What could we measure together to know we were successful? Now we're positioning value instead of price.
And you do talk about the fact that it is results based, and or lack of, as you were saying, if we don't do this, what if, and probably they've thought about that. Well, they should have, otherwise they shouldn't even be talking to you about the product. I need this because, but a big part of it is really just keep drilling down through those questions, because many, I work with people on social media. And so a lot of times, I will approach a business and we'll be talking about social media, and I'll say, well, now, what are your goals? Well, everybody else does it. Or everybody else has a Facebook page. Well, no, that's not your goal. And so it is. It's just to keep going until you really find that pain point. Our business will close, or we'll lose employees, or, all of those various, then you can work from there. And I think it's really important to note that isn't then a reason to say, well, we can charge you more. Ooh, we got a real good pain point here, let's charge you more. No, that's not about it either.
Well, but you also have to look at it as, sometimes if someone has $1 million problem and you come in with $1,000 solution, you may not seem credible.
Right. Yeah.
Because people think, well, just spending $1,000 isn't going to solve my $1 million solution or my $1 million problem. So you need to make sure that you understand the broader context, because oftentimes we are our own worst enemy when it comes to price and sales. So,
especially when we're new.
Yeah, I often say that price matters most when the seller believes price matters most. So price and all objections matter most when the seller believes that that's the most important part.
Right.
And usually it comes from the client asks a question that says, hey, here's something I need. And as a seller, you're thinking, man, I wonder how much they would pay for this. I wonder, well, gee, I'd love to sell this for $10,000, but I don't think they'll pay $10,000. So maybe they'll only pay $2,000. But if I price it at $2,000, maybe it'll price me out of the market. And all these things are going through your head instead of saying, well, so what inspired you to look for a solution for this? Oh, we have this issue and it's costing us $1 bazillion. There's a story I tell on stage of when I was early in sales, and I got assigned our largest commercial account. It was a client who was spending $1.5 million a year just in maintenance and support for our product. So about a month into, I get a phone call from this guy, Steve.
Mhm.
Steve says, hey, Ian, listen, we have these 300 images. They're like schematic diagrams. Can you guys put them up online?
Mhm.
I said, yeah, of course we can, Steve. Not because I had a clue as to whether or not we could. I was just a young sales guy, and I thought you say yes,
Right.
engineering will figure it out.
Yes. Never say no.
So we get their images. I hand them off to Steve, or I hand them off to our engineering department.
Mhm.
But a week later, Bob, the head of engineering, calls me up and says, hey, Ian, can you come down to my office?
And you're thinking, oh.
Yeah, I'd never been invited to Bob's
Right.
office.
Oh,
I'm
dear.
concerned. I get down there, and Bill, the VP of sales, my boss, is sitting in there with him.
Oh, you've been called to the principal's office.
Yeah, Bill says, close the door and grab a seat. So I'm a little
Oh,
concerned.
you've really been called to the principal's office.
So they start, Bob says, look, this is typically impossible. Everyone will tell you it can't be done. My engineers are amazing. We figured out a way to do it, but it's going to be really complicated and it's going to be expensive. In fact, for these 300 images they have each quarter, it's going to cost $1,000 per image to convert the 300 images.
Wow.
I'm thinking, well, it can't get any worse than this.
Uh-huh.
Bill proved me wrong. Bill says, oh, and that's our internal cost.
Oh.
The client should be paying about $500,000 each time they need these images. So I concluded two things right away. First, you can't deliver news like this over the phone. And second, I should probably start working on my resume.
Right. Yeah. Uh-oh. Yeah.
It's like, oh, man, I'd come the next morning, have this epiphany. I'm like, wait, I got it. So I call up my man, Steve, my client. I said, Steve, listen, we met at our annual conference. Other than that, you and I don't know each other that well. Here's what I'd like to propose. I'm going to fly out to you first thing Tuesday morning. I'll get to your office about noon. We're not going to talk business at all on Tuesday. I've got a tea time set to play golf. I've got dinner reservations. This way we get to know each other on Tuesday,
Right.
8 a.m. Wednesday morning. I'll come to your office. We'll talk about these images. So, so why did I do that? Well, people will say, well, you're trying to build rapport. You're trying to get more information. I was just a young sales guy, and I thought, man, if I'm getting fired on Wednesday,
Yeah. You'll have had a
I'm
good
going to have a
round of
great
golf.
Tuesday. I'm gonna have a great Tuesday. So before I leave on the trip, Bill, the VP of sales, comes to me and says, look, these guys are our flagship client. They're in all of our marketing. Don't mess this up.
Right.
Which I'm guessing was his version of a pep talk.
Yeah.
And he said,
And tacked in there was, or you'll be fired. I mean,
Exactly.
he really knew that.
That was clearly implied. And he says, so I've talked to our executive team. We've agreed that the client's never going to go for this. So why don't you see if you can sell it at cost? So pitch it at 300,000. If you need to, you can even go to 280. So it's like, yeah, okay. And all I'm thinking is my golf clubs are packed. I'm going to have a good day.
Right. Yeah.
So I go out there. We had this great day with the client. Next morning, I get to Steve's office for an 8 a.m. meeting at 7:45. Steve is waiting in the lobby for me to show up. He pulls me into a conference room. He says, hey, thanks for yesterday. Now, what about these images? Do you have a solution? And of course, I was petrified to talk about it because price matters most when the seller, who was me, believes price matters most. So I stalled. I said, so Steve, can you remind me, why is it again you need to convert these images? So he said, I don't think we ever talked about it. See, our distributors overseas carry our products and our competitors' products. They've all moved to the system. They just send it a CD-ROM. We're still printing this stuff out and then inserting them in notebooks at each location. It takes us 6 weeks to do that. And we've calculated it's costing us $30 to $40 million a quarter.
Oh.
We can't get the images out there sooner. So now $300,000, big number or small number?
Right. Oh yeah.
So
They're
now
going to pay 500.
Yeah. Now it's a trivial amount. So he says, and I got to tell you, Ian, if we don't find a solution to this thing in a hurry, I'm going to be looking for a new job. So I knew at that point it was really important to Steve. I also discovered that Steve and I had more in common than I originally thought.
Right. Yeah. You were both on that block.
Yeah. So I turned to Steve. I said, Steve, I've got great news. We can solve this. It's only going to cost $500,000 a quarter. He says, oh man,
Yeah.
that's
He's
fantastic. That's great. Do you have an agreement with you? I mean, Steve,
I could get one.
it's like, Steve, I mean, yesterday we hardly even knew each other. I didn't think it'd be appropriate to bring a
Right.
contract with me. And I actually had two contracts with me, one that said 300,000, one that said 280.
Right. And you're
But I
thinking,
can't-
yeah, can't do those.
I can't take those out because now I know it should be sold at $500,000. And, guess what? That's the right price for this thing. So when I get back to the DC office, I told him, look, I'll send you a contract tomorrow. When I get back to the DC office where I was working, the VP of sales, Bill, says, so how'd it go? I said, it went great. They're moving forward.
You're like,
Bill says, really? I said, yeah. He says, wow. At the 300,000?
You said,
No, Bill. He says, tell me you got him to agree to the 280. Bill, I didn't. I let Bill spend about 20 minutes beating me up about pricing, margins, public company reporting. There's a smirk on my face. I said, Bill, I sold it for $500,000. He says, how did you do that? I said, Bill, don't you realize it's costing these guys $30 million? I had no clue.
Right.
I just got lucky. But it was a critical lesson I learned, essential to everything I teach, which is too often people focus on that superficial part of the issue. Well, I want your help in this area. Maybe it's a personal trainer. Maybe it's a coach. Maybe it's, any type of service you're offering. But what we don't ask is, well, what happens if you don't get that?
Right.
And so that level of going beyond issue, which we call the tip of the iceberg, getting into the meat of the impact, and then the relative importance compared to other things on their plate is a central thing to everything I teach that really helps our clients get the most value for what they do. And we write about this extensively in Same-Side Selling.
Right. And it could be, we haven't really talked about competitors. It could be that, there are lots of competitors, let's be honest. There's no product or service that is totally unique. But, when you have those competitors, and you talk about this in your book, what you do is you show how you are unique, and so talk to us about that.
Well, so one of the things is that the reason why organizations purchase from one, especially when it comes to services, from one company versus another, but it's really across the board, is how well they feel you understand their situation.
Right.
And if all you do is talk about yourself, then when you leave, they go, wow, I learned a lot about them, but I don't think they know us all that well.
Yeah, they don't know it's going to cost me $30 million a year to do this.
Yeah, but if you spend the time asking good questions about them, you'll be amazed how few questions they ask you about you, because what's going through the client's mind is, well, one of us needs to have enough information about the other one to be able to make a decision. And if you ask enough questions about them, they might feel like you have enough information to evaluate whether or not there's a good fit there.
Right.
And so that's kind of what we're trying to get to. And so the idea is that there are a number of different things you can do to stand out. There's a concept that I teach that actually isn't even in Same-Side Selling, but people can search for it, called the client vision pyramid. And the idea of the client vision, it'll be in the next book I'm writing. And the client vision pyramid, the idea is that anytime someone's researching a certain relationship with a vendor, it's helping them understand the difference in the marketplace. So in Same-Side Selling, in the bonus content online on samesideselling.com, we have a bunch of different case studies.
Okay.
And there was a company, we profile named GPS Insight. And GPS Insight provides amazing solutions for tracking fleets of automobiles. So if you're doing emergency equament, if you're handling, if you're the cable company doing installation, or the telecom company, or you're somebody who's doing a lot of deliveries and you have a whole fleet, these guys manage all the details behind it. And their concern was that, look, we're getting compared against people who just put a GPS tracker on a vehicle to know where it is. Meanwhile, we're communicating with clients, hey, someone's going to be there in the next 40 minutes. So you're not giving people an 8-hour window to show up. We're telling them, here's where this person should go for the lowest price gasoline on their route today. We're telling them, hey, it looks like this driver is just sitting idle for an hour and just burning gas for you. We're identifying this vehicle needs to be serviced in the next month because it's going to come, like all those different things that it's doing. And so we built this client vision pyramid for them. So what they would say is, and this is the structure, is, well, gee, when people come to us for vehicle tracking, they're usually looking for solutions at one of 3 levels. And this is the client vision pyramid. At the base level is what we call effective. This is where people say, look, I just want to track my vehicles. Give me a way to do that. And so there are systems out there that do that very effectively. Like, oh, okay, cool. That's all I need. At the next level is what we call enhanced. This is people who have broader systems that not only will track the vehicles, but might give you suggestions on routing, might give you suggestions for maintenance and service and gasoline and things like that. At the highest level is what we call the engaged level. This is where you're looking for a partner who's not only going to make it better in terms of the vehicles, but is focused on how you can impact your customers, how you can grow your market share, how you can grow the share value of your company by more effectively managing those operations. So which level are you looking for?
Right.
And so now what I've just done is I've established that there are 3 different levels, which candidly the client probably never considered that there could be 3 different levels. So I now made it clear, how we might stand out compared to the competition. And I get to ask them which level they're looking for. Well, so what net effect did it have for GPS Insight? So aside from executing fabulously the different things that they learned through same-side selling, they implemented this client vision pyramid. And in one of their groups, where before 20% of their team was hitting their numbers, a year later, over 90% of their team was hitting their numbers.
Wow.
And it's just having very clear communication that says, here's where we are different compared to other people. Now, the beauty is that when you use that client vision pyramid, what your potential client does is everybody they meet, they automatically put them into one of those categories. But the categories didn't exist. We made them up. We created the categories, but now they put people into those because they say, oh, well, gee, it sounds, Deb, like your business, you guys are engaged, but these other people I talked to, they were only ineffective. And it creates a clear differentiator for them right out of the chute.
Right. You know, and then the other thing that you talk about in your book, you know, is getting rid of the people that aren't going to matter at all. You know, and you know, in realtor terms, the looky-loos, you know, or, you know, the people who are just going to walk up and kick the tires. You're going to spend a minimal amount of time with them, you know, because you never know, you know, they might be kicking the tires to really be engaged, but, you know, you're not going to waste a lot of time with them. And I think that's one of the things that is so hard for people in business is figuring out, and I hate to say put it this way, but it really is this way, who's worth spending the time on.
Yeah. Well, and the way I like to look at it, so it doesn't sound like it's something condescending.
Yeah, that was that was.
And I've been doing this long enough that I figured out a way, I think, to do it where it doesn't sound negative, which is, look, I'm just trying to find the people for whom we can have the greatest impact, who have a problem they feel is worth solving, and who I look and say, yep, I can help them deliver those results. And so we qualify not only on issue, impact, and importance, but one of the other things we look at is, well, what are the results? So what would it look like 6 months from now that we would measure so we know that we're successful?
Right.
So what happens for most people when they're selling something is the way people evaluate a meeting is almost like how they would evaluate a personal interaction or a date. So you think about it, and you can fill in the blanks. So I'm sure you've heard this. People come back from a meeting, they say, oh, I had the best meeting with this potential client. It was amazing. We agreed that we would spend 20 minutes together, but instead the meeting lasted for
an hour.
An hour. Oh my goodness, amazing. And the two of us, man, as soon as we got together, we just
clicked.
We connected. And the meeting went so well, Deb, that we've agreed that next week we've already scheduled a time to
meet again.
And that would be a great way to describe a successful meeting if it was set up on an online dating site.
Right.
But it's not a good way to evaluate a good business meeting.
No.
And so what you have to start wondering is, okay, are people going on business dates or are they doing business? And so we built a tool for people that we write about in Same Side Selling called the Same Side Quadrants. And the idea of the Same Side Quadrants is a method for taking notes that allows us to focus on the right information so we can quickly determine, is this opportunity worth both of our time or isn't it? And so if it turns out that it's just not a fit, we shouldn't feel like a failure. It's just
not a fit.
We figured out that there wasn't a good fit today. Doesn't mean there never will be.
Right.
It means that we're not the best people to help them solve whatever the issue is, or the issue isn't important enough to warrant a change.
Right.
And so if you want, I can walk you through these same side quadrants and how people use it.
Because I've been on a lot of those business dates.
Yeah.
and sometimes you really do decide, okay, this is going to be a friendship.
Sure.
But we spend so much time spinning our wheels trying to make it fit that's, you know, I think that's the problem, you know, and so talk to us about the quadrants.
Yeah. So the idea of the quadrants is this, and if people Google it, they'll find it. We actually created these journals because after 2.5 years of people asking, do we create journals? And I kept saying, no, you can create it on your own. Now we created them and they're pretty popular. But so the idea is this, is that, and I'll show people how they can navigate it just on their own. So on a blank sheet of paper, you draw a vertical line down the center of the page, horizontal line across the page, breaking into 4 quadrants. This is going to be our template for taking notes.
Okay.
In the upper left quadrant, what we do is we take notes about the issue that they raised, meaning the prompt for that is, well, what inspired you to meet with us today? And now I get information about what it is that they're initially interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Then in the upper right quadrant, we take notes about the impact or importance. So the idea is we'll ask a question like, well, what happens if you don't solve that? And the goal of impact and importance is to understand what's the measurable impact of not solving this? What does it cost them by not solving this?
Mm-hmm.
And compared to other things on their plate, how important is it to address this issue and why?
Right.
Because they might have something that's costing them $1 million, but they have something else that's life or death in their business.
Right. Yeah. And so the $1 million,
Yeah. Until I solve this bigger issue, I don't even care about that. In the lower left quadrant is where we take notes about the results, meaning, look, just because you pay us money doesn't mean we're successful. What can we measure together to know that we're successful so you can hold us accountable? 6 months down the road, a year down the road. Hey, I'm just curious. I want to make sure that what we do is high five worthy. And I don't want to come back to you looking for a high five and you think we're not even close to there.
Yeah, you were
so
adequate.
We want to make this high five worthy. And how would we measure that? So now we've got something that we're measuring in terms of impact and measuring in terms of results. Well, the funny part is the value of your solution is the gap between the impact of not solving it and the quantifiable results that you're going to measure. That's the definition of the value of your solution at that point. In the lower right quadrant is where we take notes about the results. I'm sorry, not the results, the others impacted, meaning if you've ever been in a deal where in the 11th hour someone's name comes up you've never heard of, they kill the deal, it's because we don't know who else needs to be involved. So people have been trained to ask a horrid question.
Right.
They don't know a better way to ask, so they ask the question, who's the decision maker? And the problem with that question is that it immediately triggers an adversarial response because it's almost like saying, well, Deb, I'm sure it isn't you.
Yeah.
So who is
I'm wasting my time talking to you.
And it feels like you're going to better deal them. So instead we ask, well, who else would have an opinion about how this is impacting the organization? Who else is most directly impacted? Who else would have a strong opinion about how we measure results? Who might disagree with how we're measuring the results?
Right.
That'll give you a sense of who needs to be involved. And those quadrants give you a snapshot of what's important. And in essence, it's a little mini business case for the client. Now, here's the interesting part about it. Remember, the questions that people ask when they're looking to make or approve a decision are, what problem does it solve? Why do I need it? What's the likely outcome or result? So if I just focus on those, because we know that the alternatives is a distant third, then the issue or the upper left quadrant corresponds to what problem are we trying to solve. The impact and importance is equivalent to why do we need to solve it. And then the results in the lower left quadrant corresponds to what are the results that we're looking for. And so now I'm actually facilitating a meeting that's giving the client the answers to the questions they would be asking if they were conscious of it.
Right.
And so now when I use that model, the beauty is this, is that if I have those 4 quadrants, how long, more than a second or less than a second, do I need to look at that sheet of paper to realize that maybe I forgot to cover one of the quadrants? It's just a glance and I go, right? And so the idea is that it becomes a very straightforward way of capturing it. I mean, to give you an idea, on my desk, I have one of these quadrant journals always here for taking notes, right? And the whole idea is that there's little faint watermarks to remind people of the questions to ask and how to navigate that process. And the idea is that we just don't want to have surprises. And neither does our client. And then when you take this and after the fact, you send the client a summary note that says, hey, here's a summary of my notes. What does the client say? Wow, they totally get me.
They get me.
Yeah, they totally listen. They understand exactly what we're trying to do. That is, in fact, the results we're looking for. And they told us, here's what it's going to cost to get that. Yeah, I feel better working with them than with somebody else.
Right. Well, and as you're going through that, you're obviously going to find other things that are missing. As you said, the missing people. It might be that they think, well, we won't meet our own internal sales quota, but then they miss the fact that that's going to mean we're going to have to let staff go. And so it really is this thought process of getting through everything. And obviously these are for complicated purchases. If it's, ink or, paper. So that doesn't really matter. But, these really are for fairly complicated type of decisions that people are spending, quite a bit of money on.
Well, you know what? They are and they aren't. In some cases, it could be, for example, somebody might be switching from one wealth advisor to another one, or looking at a different wealth advisor. And then we want to think about, so what questions do we ask about the competition? Now, I can't talk trash about the competition ever.
Right. Never, ever do that. No.
Yeah, but what I can do is I can say, geez, you've been working with someone for a long time. They must be doing a pretty good job.
Right.
We always like to get a sense of what other people are doing that maybe we should emulate. What are some of the things you like about them?
Right. Yeah. Don't ask what do you not like.
Yep. So we ask these questions about what they like, and then we get to ask, so if you could change one or two things, what would those be? So if I said, what don't you like? They probably made the choice to hire them, so they're not going to give me much.
Right. They're not going to say, well, we screwed up by doing this.
If you could change one or two things, what would those be? And then whatever those things are that come up, you say, so is the potential of solving those worth a discussion about how we might be able to help?
Right.
And now I have to give them permission that it's okay that they made a prior decision that wasn't the same. So now what I might do is I might say, my guess is at the time when you chose that other vendor, they were the perfect fit for you. And it could just be that over time, your needs have changed and it's time for you to upgrade now.
Right.
And now it's like, well, yeah, we've all bought stuff in the past that we upgrade into something else. Why couldn't I do it here? And it makes it so it's a very non-threatening way for people to move from one provider to another.
Yeah. You're not telling them you screwed up, and so now you need to change. And they may have screwed up, and you'll find that out in the process too. Sure. But I like that concept because it's giving them the ability to make the decision, to say, it is time. And who knows what it could be. I mean, let's go back to the financial advisor. Maybe it's that person never ever responds to emails after 3 p.m.
Sure.
And they want somebody, who's going to talk to them on, evenings and weekends, because that's when they're talking with their spouse. That's when they're doing all this stuff on their own. And maybe one of the first suggestions is, have you asked them, will they respond to emails later? Because, it could be just that simple. But then you obviously have to make the decision. Am I going to respond to emails,
exactly.
or not?
Soul searching. You have to do some soul searching and make sure that you feel like you're in a good position to do that. I remember there was an event where a woman called me up and said, we have this event for our top 500 women in sales in our business. And we want to see if you'll come in, if you're available to keynote the event. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. And so I asked the question. I said, well, don't take this the wrong way, because I'm flattered that you're contacting me, but do you think that the audience might respond more favorably if you had a female speaker instead of a male speaker?
Yeah, and that would have been my first thought too, is why did they pick a man, not you? Why did they pick a male?
And she says, well, it's funny. I've actually talked to 3 male speakers so far. You're the first person to bring this up. I said, believe me, I'm flattered if there's a reason why, but are you open to introductions to a couple of women speakers in sales who could really do an amazing job for you? And all of a sudden it was like, yeah, we would be open to that. Okay, great. Then in that case, let me make that introduction. And if you don't feel that one of them suits your needs, believe me, I'd be thrilled to do it. I'm just trying to think of the best interest of your audience. And so they ended up hiring one of the women I recommended, who did amazingly well. And 6 months later, out of the blue, the client calls up and says, hey, we now have this event. It's 4,000 people for this other event, and it's everybody, not just the women group. Are you available on that date? No, I didn't recommend somebody else because I thought they were going to have another event coming up. I just said,
it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think your audience would better serve. Now, keep in mind, it's easy to do that when you don't need the business.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. And definitely, but what's so important for people to remember is you made everybody happy, because you also made that speaker happy.
Absolutely.
Whether you obviously knew her well enough to say, this is somebody who would be great, but you made her happy, you made the client happy, and you were happy because you weren't presenting where you might not have been the best fit, but more importantly, B, you got the gig further on down.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's people who say, oh, but you could have had that gig. Yeah, it's true, but the client wouldn't have been well served.
Right.
So someone in the audience would have been saying, why would we listen to this guy? There's 500 women here. Like,
yeah.
there wasn't a woman speaker who could have done this.
Mm-hmm.
And the women I recommended, I knew any one of the three of them would be amazing.
Right. Yeah. You know, and I think, you know, we've talked about this kind of off and on through the whole thing. Sometimes it isn't a good fit, you know, and it's okay to turn that business down or refer to somebody else. And now what I like to do is actually have somebody else I can refer to, rather than just say, no, you can't. But, you know, sometimes you don't. It depends on what it is. But it's not always a good fit. You know, it's, you know, you're thinking this, I'm not going to click with this client. They're too far away. They want, you know, all these various things. And it really is okay to send them to somebody else.
Well, and think about it. If we're truly focused on results for our clients, then we should never be selling something if we're not confident we can deliver the results. The beauty is this, is that when I speak with these groups of CEOs, I'll ask them, so if you have a choice, one vendor is asking about the results, another vendor is asking about the contract, which vendor would you prefer to do business with? And they say, well, the one focused on results. Okay. So how many of you would be willing to spend more money with the vendor who's asking questions about results versus the one who's just asking about who's going to sign the contract? And just about everyone will raise their hand and say, oh yeah, I would spend more with them. And I'll say, how much more? And the general consensus is about 15% more. And for the people who are hesitant to spend more, I ask the following question. I say, so how much less would you have to spend for it to be a good deal, but you don't get the results that you need? So how much less would you have to spend for it to be a good deal, but you don't get the results you need? The answer is, I'd have to pay 100% less, because if I don't get the results I need, it's not a good
waste.
deal. And so when your client or prospect pushes back on price and says, well, but you know, you said this is going to be $5,000. Someone else sold it for $4,500. Imagine if instead of saying, well, let me see what I can do, and what you've just told them is that you were overcharging them a second ago. Instead, if you said, well, the only way we can do it for less is if we backed off some of these results that you said were important. So which of those results can we back off so we can get you to a different price point? Now you're always speaking about the price or investment in the context of the results. And that gives you an amazing ability to differentiate yourself.
Yeah, because eventually they will probably go, oh, wait a minute, we really did need that. Therefore, we'll pay for it. You know,
I mean, there is undoubtedly, there have got to be hundreds, if not thousands of people who charge dramatically less than what I charge for what I do. And if I was competing solely on price, I'd be sitting around, you know, eating sunflower seeds or bonbons waiting for the phone to ring. But instead, you got to understand where your value is and help your clients understand that. And for the people who don't need or see the additional value, it's just not a fit. That's okay.
You know, and yeah, you know, it's okay. It is okay. You know, now one of the other things that you talk about in your book, and we've only got about 5 minutes left, and I love this concept, and you know, it needs far more than 5 minutes, so we just need to have you on again, is that this needs to be, you know, we talked about this adversarial, all of these various things. It needs to be that we're solving a puzzle and we're doing it together. So to really talk about that, because that struck me, and I thought it's my very first line on my notes here. You know, I really like that concept.
So the idea, we talked before about this idea of most books being about either a game metaphor or a battle metaphor. And the metaphor that we carry throughout same-side selling is a puzzle. So if you think about it, you have puzzle pieces and your clients have puzzle pieces. And so imagine if you had half the pieces to a puzzle and someone else had half the pieces, the other half to the same puzzle. Wow, that's going to be beautiful. But if they don't have the same puzzle and they have different pieces, then you can spend all the time you want. It's never going to come together. It's never going to be right. And you're both going to waste a lot of time. More importantly, if you're putting a puzzle together with somebody, can you do it without showing each other which puzzle pieces you have? You can't.
No.
So you can't be on the opposite side of a table with a wall between you. You have to have an open dialogue where everyone lays their pieces on the table and says, you know, these are going to fit together and this picture is going to be beautiful. That's the premise behind same-side selling. If we do this right, then sales isn't adversarial. It's not something you should be ashamed of. Rather, you're actually really helping people. You know, when I look at the case studies that we have on samesideselling.com, it makes me feel really good. And at no point do I think to myself, here's how much I charge this customer. I think to myself, these people went from 17 million to $100 million in 3 years. In the prior 3 years, they went from 14 million to 17 million. So I can see tangibly the results those people got. And it makes me feel good to know that those people then sold their company to somebody for over $100 million. Now, that changed their lives, right? Or when I see a company who, had me help them years ago when they could barely afford to pay what I charged to come in. And today they're growing 80% year over year, hiring people, taking people on President's Club trips to celebrate their success, building vacation homes. That's really rewarding.
Right.
And so when we focus on the results, it makes you feel really good that, hey, not only did I get paid for something, but look at the impact I had on their lives. It's funny. I'm very well known for speaking at events where it's big companies. So companies that are brand names people would know in the B2B space where I've spoken, whether it's companies like Thermo Fisher or SAP or, or different huge financial services companies. The funny part is if I increase their business by $50 million, they hardly even notice.
Right.
But it's when you take a small to medium-sized business and you help them double in a short time, you know that you've changed things for them, their family, and it really makes a huge difference. And that's the most rewarding part about what I get to do.
Right. And when we start thinking about that does help us when we're trying to set our prices. Especially, as you are a new, if you're a new business owner and you're thinking, oh, I can't charge that much. Think about what value you're bringing. What is the impact that your product or your service has? Now that's not to say get carried away, because, I was taught long ago to charge what the market will bear. So if you charge too much and the market doesn't bear it, well, then, you screwed up.
I'm going to give you one more, Deb, on that, which is you can never charge any more than you think you're worth.
Right.
So whatever you believe you are worth, that's what you can charge. So I remember when I first started speaking professionally, I charged less than 5% of what I charge today. And I was concerned, I don't know if people will spend that. And now if someone offered to pay me 90% of what I regularly charge, I'll say, I'm sorry you don't have budget for it, but thanks for considering me.
Right.
And I don't deviate from price 1 iota, and people know that. It's like I'll say to somebody, okay, to do what you want to accomplish, it costs, whatever the number is, and that's what it costs. And they say, we were hoping it'd be less. Well, this is what it costs. If you don't want to do it, I totally understand.
Right. And I have other suggestions for you.
And standing firm with a smile is totally acceptable.
Right.
You shouldn't be offended because somebody wants to pay less. They're entitled to want to pay less, and you're entitled to stand firm.
Right. Well, and when we feel like we're overcharging, that's when it's almost a desperation thing also. Say you're going to charge $1,000 and you feel, well, probably only worth 500. Well, then the second they say, well, 1,000 is more than we wanted to pay, then you're like, okay, I'll take 500. So you shoot yourself in the foot.
Well, and what happens is if you don't remember when I said you can never sell it for more than you think it's worth. The thing is that if you're selling something you don't think it's worth it, then what happens is you say, well, so I charge $2,000, but I also include this and I do this and I do, and you start in essence apologizing for the price. As opposed to in my business, if you're going through the quadrants with somebody, so I can go through the quadrant and say, so we're trying to improve our sales force. Really, what's been going on? Well, they're not really hitting their numbers. Well, how long has this been going on? I mean, you couldn't quantify that, could you? Well, each rep is probably leaving $300,000 of business on the table. Gee, and how many reps do you have? We have 100 reps. Wait,
that's
how
a
much
lot of money.
They say like $30 million. Okay. In order to solve that problem that you have, here's the approach I would take over a 90-day window, and it's going to cost $40,000 to do that. They go, $40,000 to solve a $30 million problem is not that much. But if I didn't take the time to understand what the impact is, what the results need to be, then I'd be thinking, gee, I wonder how much they would pay. I wonder if I can get this much. Instead of a collaboration where I know I'm delivering extraordinary value for their investment.
Right. Well, oh my gosh, Ian, this really has been so much fun. And again, we're talking about your book, Same Side Selling, and which is available, I'm guessing, Amazon, all those wonderful places.
Everywhere, yeah.
But how do people get in touch with you and work with you?
Well, so the easiest way is online. You can reach me at Ian Altman. So it's IANALTMAN. So it's ianaltman.com. On Twitter, it's Ian Altman. On LinkedIn, it's Ian Altman. And of course, the bonus content and all the ins and outs and videos on Same Side Selling are at samesideselling.com. And I have no doubt that if you get to one of those URLs, it easily gets you to the other one.
Perfect. I love it. I love it. Well, this really has been great. And we made it through, about half of my notes here. We didn't even talk about same side pitch. I thought that was interesting, and so, yes, we want people to get your book to learn more about that. And some of my other notes here, what is the buyer buying? That was one of my notes, all these various things. So we want them to get your book, but it just means we need to have you on again. So we will do that.
All right, Deb. Well, thanks so much.
Great. Well, I am Deb Creer. I've been having an absolutely wonderful time talking with Ian Altman. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer. Join us next time for more real-life stories and techniques to power up your business.
You've been listening to C-Suite Radio. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.